When doctors had given up on her legs, a young girl found hope through the care of a dedicated mechanic and her loving mother. Today, we'll show you how courage, love, and determination came together to change her life forever. This is a story of true inspiration and miracles. Like, share, and subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from. Now let's get started. In the heart of Texas, the sun dipped low over endless wheat fields, painting the world in soft gold. A black sedan drove down a dusty rural road, the sound of gravel crunching beneath its tires. Inside sat Victoria, a graceful woman in her late 30s, her eyes tired yet full of determination. Beside her, her 19-year-old daughter Emma stared silently out the window, her reflection pale against the glass. The wheelchair folded in the back seat was a reminder of everything she had lost. Her freedom, her strength, her youth. Doctors had said there was no hope. Her legs would never work again. But a mother's heart doesn't give up that easily. Victoria had heard rumors about a young mechanic in a nearby town, a man who built strange machines that helped people move again. It sounded crazy, but crazy was better than hopeless. When the car rolled to a stop outside a small roadside garage, Victoria hesitated for a moment. The place was nothing like a medical center. The sign was faded, the windows dusty, and the air filled with the scent of oil and iron. Yet something about it felt alive, like it held stories of persistence and second chances. She turned to her daughter. "We're here, sweetheart," she said softly. Emma didn't reply, but her eyes flickered with a faint spark of curiosity. It had been months since she had shown interest in anything. That tiny spark was enough for Victoria to push open her door. Inside, the sound of metal echoed. Sparks flew from a welding torch as a young man worked intently on a half-built motorcycle. His clothes were covered in grease and sweat rolled down his temples, but his focus was pure. This was Ethan, 26 years old, a mechanic who fixed what others had long forgotten. He looked up when he heard the door creak and quickly removed his gloves. "Can I help you, ma'am?" he asked politely, wiping his hands on a rag. Victoria hesitated, unsure how to begin. I was told you build things. Machines that help people walk." Ethan looked surprised. "I've tried a few designs," he admitted, "but nothing official. I just experiment." Victoria took a deep breath and stepped aside, revealing Emma in her wheelchair. For a moment, silence filled the air. The mechanic's expression softened as he walked closer. "What happened to her legs?" he asked gently. "An accident," Victoria whispered, her voice trembling. "The doctors did everything they could. They said she'll never walk again." Ethan crouched down beside Emma, meeting her eyes. "Do you want to walk again?" he asked. Emma looked away, her lips trembling. "More than anything," she whispered. There was something about her voice, fragile yet full of quiet strength, that struck Ethan deeply. He nodded slowly. "Then I'll try," he said. "I can't promise a miracle, but I'll do everything I can." Victoria blinked, tears gathering in her eyes. "You don't even know us," she said softly. "Why would you help?" Ethan gave a faint smile. "Because everyone deserves a second chance," he replied. "And sometimes hope just needs a little help from good hands." His words carried a warmth that filled the room, even stronger than the light pouring through the dusty windows. Victoria helped Emma out of the car and into the garage, where Ethan cleared space for her wheelchair near his workbench. He showed them sketches, crude but imaginative, of mechanical braces and exoskeleton frames. They were messy but full of passion. "These are just ideas," he said, flipping through the pages. Emma's eyes followed each drawing, her lips curving into the faintest smile. "They're beautiful," she said quietly. Ethan chuckled. "They're just metal and wires," he replied. "But if they can help you move again, then maybe they'll mean something." As the afternoon faded into evening, Victoria watched her daughter come alive in a way she hadn't seen in years. She laughed softly as Ethan explained how motors and sensors could mimic muscles. For the first time since the accident, Emma's face glowed with curiosity. The mechanic's garage, filled with old tools and broken engines, felt more like a sanctuary than a workshop. Victoria sat back, her heart swelling with a fragile kind of hope she hadn't dared to feel. She didn't know if this young man could truly help, But for now, just believing again felt like a miracle of its own. When it was time to leave, Ethan promised he would start right away. "Give me a few weeks," he said confidently. "I'll build something that might just surprise you." Victoria clasped his hand tightly. "Thank you," she whispered. Emma looked up at him and smiled, a small, shy smile, but real. Ethan smiled back, his heart unexpectedly heavy. As the car drove away, he stood in the doorway, watching the dust settle behind them. The golden light wrapped around him like a promise. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. He sat in the workshop, surrounded by blueprints and half-built machines. Every clang of metal echoed with purpose. He thought of Emma's trembling voice, her shy eyes filled with longing. He knew this wasn't just another repair job. It was a chance to rebuild something much bigger. Hope, perhaps. Or faith, maybe both. As dawn crept over the horizon, Ethan picked up his tools again. A new day had begun, and so had a miracle in the making. Days turned into weeks, and the small Texas garage became a place of quiet determination. The clanging of tools and the hum of welding filled the air from sunrise until late into the night. Ethan worked endlessly, surrounded by sketches, wires, and discarded parts. His hands were raw, his clothes torn and stained, but his focus never wavered. Every screw, every circuit, every welded joint carried a purpose, the promise he had made to a mother and her daughter. Outside, the autumn air carried the scent of dust and gasoline, and sometimes, when the wind blew just right, it brought the faint sound of laughter from the nearby park. Ethan would pause for a moment, imagine Emma's voice among those sounds, then push himself harder. Victoria and Emma visited often. Each time they arrived, the garage seemed to brighten. Emma would roll her wheelchair close to the workbench, her eyes wide with fascination as Ethan explained his progress. "These motors will help your knees bend," he said one afternoon, tightening bolts on a steel frame. "And these sensors will respond to your movements." Emma nodded, her voice soft. "So, it'll feel like I'm walking again?" Ethan smiled. "Not just feel, you will walk." Victoria watched them from behind, holding a paper cup of coffee, her heart swelling with gratitude. She hadn't seen Emma this alive in years. Ethan had turned part of his garage into a small testing zone. Broken bicycles and car parts were pushed aside, replaced by wires and makeshift equipment. Emma's laughter echoed every time he cracked a joke or fumbled with a tool. Despite the grease and exhaustion, Ethan found joy in every moment. He wasn't just building a machine, he was rebuilding hope. Sometimes, late at night, Victoria stayed behind to help clean the place. "You don't have to stay," Ethan would say, but she always smiled. "You've done enough for us. Let me do something in return." They rarely spoke much during those evenings, but the silence between them was peaceful, the kind of silence filled with mutual respect and unspoken care. The project wasn't easy. Ethan faced failures more than once. Circuits burned out, motors jammed, and wires snapped. There were nights when frustration pushed him close to giving up. He'd sit on the floor, hands in his hair, wondering if he was chasing something impossible. But then he'd remember Emma's trembling voice when she said, "More than anything." That single phrase played in his mind like a prayer. He'd wipe his face, grab his tools again, and start over. Hope didn't need perfection, it needed persistence. One evening, as rain poured outside, Victoria and Emma showed up unexpectedly with dinner. "You haven't eaten, have you?" Victoria teased, setting down a basket of food. Ethan laughed, embarrassed. "Guilty." They shared sandwiches by the workbench, the sound of rain blending with their quiet conversation. Emma asked questions about the tools, the designs, the mechanics of walking. Her curiosity grew every day, and Victoria watched in awe. This small garage, once just a place of repairs, had become a space where her daughter rediscovered joy. When Ethan spoke about the exoskeleton, his voice carried more than technical passion. It carried care. Victoria could feel it in every word. Weeks passed, and the final prototype began to take shape. A sleek metal frame with adjustable supports and motorized joints stood in the center of the garage. It looked fragile yet strong, like a promise sculpted from steel. Ethan worked through the night polishing the exoskeleton, making sure every detail was perfect. The day he finished, dawn painted the sky in soft pink and gold. He stepped back, covered in sweat and grease, staring at his creation. "You're ready," he whispered. The machine hummed softly, as if alive. Later that morning, Victoria and Emma arrived. The moment they entered, Emma's eyes widened. "Is that—" Ethan nodded, smiling. "It's yours." Victoria covered her mouth, tears forming instantly. "It's beautiful," she breathed. The air felt sacred, filled with emotion and disbelief. Ethan carefully helped Emma into the exoskeleton, securing the straps and adjusting the sensors to fit her body. "It might feel strange at first," he said gently, "but trust it, and trust yourself." Emma's heart raced as the motors hummed to life around her legs. Victoria stood nearby, her hands trembling. For a moment, nothing happened. Then slowly, the machine lifted her body upward. Emma gasped as her legs straightened under her. She could feel pressure, movement, strength. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she looked down at her feet, standing on the ground for the first time in years. Victoria let out a sob, rushing forward to hold her daughter. Ethan stepped back, overwhelmed, his eyes glistening with emotion. The garage was filled with the sound of laughter, crying, and the soft hum of a miracle in motion. Emma took her first step. It was shaky, uncertain, but real. She laughed through tears, holding on to her mother as Ethan adjusted the controls. "You're doing it," he said, his voice trembling. "You're walking." Victoria wept openly, whispering, "Thank you." "Thank you, Ethan." The young mechanic couldn't speak. He simply nodded, his chest heavy with pride and relief. All the sleepless nights, the failures, the pain, it was all worth it for this one moment. As the morning sun poured through the open garage door, golden light bathed them all. Emma stood tall, tears glistening like stars on her cheeks. Victoria held her close, her heart overflowing with gratitude. And Ethan, he stood a few steps away, watching quietly, a small smile on his lips. The machine had worked, but it wasn't just mechanics that made it happen. It was faith, love, and the courage to try when the world had already given up. That evening, after they left, Ethan sat alone in the now silent garage. The tools lay scattered, the machine stood gleaming in the corner, and the sunlight faded into a soft orange glow. He finally allowed himself to exhale. For once, the sound of his beating heart was enough. He didn't fix an engine this time. He fixed something far more powerful, a dream. And that was something no machine could measure. The next morning arrived with a calm silence that felt almost sacred. The Texas sky was clear, painted in soft shades of blue and gold, and the scent of freshly cut grass drifted through the air. Ethan stood in his garage, staring at the exoskeleton frame resting in the sunlight. It was ready for one final test, this time outside under the open sky. His heart pounded with a mix of excitement and nervousness. He had spent weeks perfecting every detail, tightening every bolt, making sure the system could handle Emma's weight and movement. This was the day that would decide everything. A luxury car pulled up to the small garage, dust swirling gently around its tires. Victoria stepped out, radiant but anxious, followed closely by Emma sitting in her wheelchair. Her hands gripped the armrests tightly. Though she had stood before, she hadn't yet walked outside, hadn't felt the ground under her feet in years. "Morning," Ethan said with a soft smile, wiping his hands on his jeans. "You ready to make history today?" Emma smiled nervously. "I think so," she whispered. Victoria knelt beside her daughter, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "No matter what happens, I'm already proud of you," she said, her voice trembling. Ethan carefully rolled the exoskeleton toward them. Sunlight reflected off its polished surface, making it glimmer like something magical. "We'll take it slow," he said reassuringly. "Just one step at a time." He adjusted the harness and sensors around Emma's legs and waist, checking the connections. Victoria watched, her heart pounding. The sight of her daughter strapped into a machine should have been terrifying, but instead it filled her with awe. She could see the fire in Emma's eyes, the same spark she had lost long ago. Ethan powered up the system. A faint mechanical hum filled the air. "Okay," he said softly. "When you're ready, press the button on your wrist." Emma's fingers trembled as she reached for it. For a moment, the world went still. Then she pressed it. The motors whirred gently, and her legs began to shift. Slowly, her body lifted upward. She gasped, eyes wide, as the machine guided her into a standing position. Victoria's hand flew to her mouth, tears spilling instantly. "Oh my God," she whispered. "She's standing again." Ethan took a careful step back, watching every movement, his face full of quiet pride. Emma looked down at her feet. The sunlight touched her sneakers, the same pair she hadn't worn since before the accident. "I can feel it," she whispered, her voice trembling. "The ground—" "I can feel it." Her knees shook slightly, but she stayed upright, supported by both technology and determination. Ethan's voice was steady but emotional. "You're doing amazing, Emma. Take a small step. Trust it." She took a breath, shifted her weight forward, and moved her leg. One step. The sound of her foot touching the ground echoed louder than anything else. Victoria let out a sob and ran forward, catching her daughter in a trembling embrace. Emma laughed and cried at the same time, her body shaking with disbelief. "Mom, I'm walking!" she cried out, her voice breaking. Victoria could barely speak through her tears. "I never stopped believing in you," she said, holding her close. Ethan turned away for a moment, wiping his eyes. He wasn't the kind of man who showed emotions easily, but this moment broke every wall he'd built. Years of work, pain, and perseverance, all for this one miracle. They spent the next hour practicing small steps. Emma's confidence grew with every move, her laughter filling the air like music. Even Ethan couldn't help but laugh when she jokingly said, "You'd better patent this thing before someone steals your idea." Victoria stood nearby, her phone in hand, recording every moment, knowing this was something she'd replay for the rest of her life. As the sun climbed higher, it painted the scene in golden light. A mechanic, a mother, and a daughter, standing together in the middle of a miracle. Eventually, Emma grew tired. Ethan helped her back into the wheelchair, careful and gentle. "You did it," he said softly. "You really did?" She smiled through her exhaustion. "No," she said, "we did." Victoria placed her hand on Ethan's shoulder. "You've given us back what we thought was gone forever," she said, her voice thick with gratitude. "If there's anything I can do for you, anything, just name it." Ethan shook his head, his smile humble. "All I ever wanted," he said, "was to see her walk again. That's enough for me." The car's engine hummed as Victoria helped Emma inside. Before they left, Emma rolled down her window and called out, "Ethan?" He looked up from his tools. "Yeah?" She smiled, her eyes shining. "You didn't just fix my legs. You fixed my hope." Ethan's heart swelled, but all he could do was wave. As the car disappeared down the road, the sun began to set, bathing the garage in a warm orange glow. Ethan stood there for a long while, staring at the spot where the car had been. The silence of the garage felt different now, lighter, peaceful. He looked around at the scraps of metal, the scattered tools, the grease-stained floor. To anyone else it was just a messy workshop, but to him it was sacred ground, a place where faith had taken shape in steel and motion. He stepped outside, breathing in the cool evening air. The horizon burned gold and crimson as the sun dipped low, and for the first time in a long while, Ethan smiled with his whole heart. He wasn't a doctor, a scientist, or a rich man. He was just a mechanic, a man with tools, compassion, and a stubborn refusal to give up. And somehow, that had been enough to create a miracle. Later that night, Victoria sent him a short video message, Emma walking across their living room, laughing uncontrollably while their dog barked in excitement. "She hasn't stopped practicing," Victoria said through happy tears. "You changed our lives, Ethan. We'll never forget you." Ethan replayed the message again and again until the screen dimmed. Then he leaned back in his chair, eyes glistening, whispering to himself, "That's all I ever needed." The night was quiet except for the soft chirp of crickets. The stars stretched endlessly across the Texas sky, and the world felt beautifully still. Somewhere out there, a mother and daughter were laughing again, living again, All because someone dared to believe that broken things could still be fixed. Ethan closed the garage door, turned off the lights, and whispered a simple truth into the darkness. Miracles don't always come from heaven. Sometimes they come from human hands.